This is Dane Wigington with Geoengineeringwatch.org. This is installment number 11 of Climate Engineering Q&A. And about the ongoing climate engineering onslaught, it continues to worsen by the day. How much more can the planet's life support systems take? That remains to be seen, but consider many links in the chain are already far past the breaking point. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can in these ongoing 20 to 25 minute segments of Climate Engineering Q&A. I apologize for not being able to get to all questions that have been submitted. I'll roll over other questions into upcoming sessions of Climate Engineering Q&A. I greatly appreciate all those that took the time to write in. If you wish to submit a question to be addressed on Climate Engineering Q&A, you can do so through the following email address: questions@geoengineeringwatch.org. Let's get to this session of Climate Engineering Q&A. First question. Boba asks, how are commercial aircraft able to carry the load needed to spray the sky when they have to store many passengers, luggage, and fuel? Boba, first, consider that the commercial aircraft being used are carrying much smaller payloads. And next, remember the big question on the carry-on luggage that happened in years past, where they became very concerned about the weight issues and so forth, trying to curtail the weight that passengers were carrying onto the aircraft. So that was likely at a point in time when the commercial carriers were being ramped up further to participate in the climate engineering operations. And also the dispersions from a commercial aircraft would be much, much smaller than from a military tanker. And we can see this on film footage that we have at geoengineeringwatch.org. Military tankers, for example, a KC-135, KC-10, C-17 Globemaster, leave massive swaths behind them as they cover the horizon in their aerosol dispersions, where we might see a much shorter, more consistent trail behind a commercial aircraft. And also, let's remember this, the U.S. DoD is currently leasing from 800 to 1,000 commercial aircraft for their purposes. What are those purposes? What are those aircraft actually being used for? And those are commercial aircraft with commercial markings. So the scope and scale of these programs is indeed massive. Commercial carriers have absolutely been utilized for these programs. We know that from flight trackers. But again, much smaller payloads, much less dispersion, but still being used. And there's the question of fuel additives as well in some operations. That may be a part of the climate engineering aerosol dispersion method, fuel additives, but the payload dispersions are by far the bigger part of the equation. Thank you for your question, Boba. Chris asks this: given all the toxins that have been raining down on us for years and the nanotechnology we've all been breathing or ingesting, it's my assumption that those running these operations must have some sort of mitigation for that dastardly science. In regard to chelation, Chris, we know that there are chelation centers in Germany, for example. We spoke to one individual that was able to have himself treated in this center that removes the blood from the body and chelates the blood, removing all the toxins in it. This is a very sophisticated form of chelation, is not available to all of us. But by this type of chelation, it is possible that, done perhaps once a year, those in power would be able to, at least in the short term, exempt themselves from many of the consequences that the rest of us are beginning to experience from the constant inhalation of these nanoparticulates that are raining down through the air column. So yes, there are likely technologies that would exempt those in power from many of the consequences, at least in the short run. Next question is from Surf. Surf asks, could weather modification be exposed by showing how they manipulate markets like grain futures, manipulating markets by means of impacting crop yields? Certainly, Surf, there are disaster capitalists in this equation. The comparison I've made with such individuals in the past is like pirates on a sinking ship loading their pockets with valuables while the ship goes down. And that won't do them much good for much longer. So the bottom line is, the disaster capitalists are certainly utilizing the climate manipulation to their advantage, but ultimately the entire ship is going down. So such profiteering won't do them much good for much longer. But this is a way by which we could trace some involved with the climate engineering operations. Again, there are many layers to this issue. There are many avenues that need to be pursued. We simply need more people to help us pursue them. We're doing everything we can at geoengineeringwatch.org to expose this insanity, bring it to light, bring it to a halt, while we still have some part of Earth's life support systems yet to salvage. But we need all the help we can get to pursue the various avenues which will help us to expose this issue. Thanks for your question, Surf. Paul asks, Please tell us about the polar vortex we keep hearing discussed. Are these polar vortexes real or just a way for the weather makers to cover their tracks about the great cool downs? These polar vortexes, they're engineered cool downs, as Paul states. These polar vortexes, as they state, seem to result from disruptions of the jet stream and from the reduction in differential temperatures across latitudes. But that is only a part of the equation, Paul, as I think you seem to know by your question. Ionosphere heaters can and are manipulating upper-level wind currents. And the official narrative from the so-called climate science community that the radical behavior in the jet stream is simply a result of these temperature differentials is not true. By creating high and low pressure zones, the jet stream can be manipulated in a manner that looks much like the fan belt on the front of a car that wraps clockwise around some pulleys, counterclockwise around other pulleys. High pressure in the northern hemisphere rotates clockwise, low pressures rotate counterclockwise, and they can very, very effectively manipulate upper-level wind currents to push air masses in the direction they want. In regard to these cooldowns, though, it's imperative to remember the chemical ice nucleating elements that are being utilized. Let's take what happened in Texas as a recent example. Yes, they manipulated upper-level wind currents, pushed cold air south, but the moisture that was the core component to what happened in Texas came right out of the record-warm Gulf of Mexico. And when they chemically nucleate this moisture, they create a very cold, dense layer of air that descends to the ground, which the power structure-controlled weather disseminating entities then attribute only to the polar vortex scenario, which is a blatant, glaring lie. Patented processes of chemical ice nucleation can create extraordinarily cold layers at the ground. This frozen precipitation is typically 20 plus degrees colder than the ambient air temperature, and that's relevant to whatever the outside temperature is. The colder the outside temperature it becomes, the lower the frozen material temperature becomes as well. So they can drop these temperatures down lower and lower if they continue the chemical ice nucleating process. Bottom line, to learn more about the engineering winter scenarios, please search that section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, Engineering Winter. Bottom line, the polar vortex narrative as a reason for these winter weather whiplash cooldowns is simply a cover-up for the climate engineers and their operations. Thanks for your question, Paul. From Teresa, who's responsible or behind all of this mess in our skies? That makes my eyes burn and itch. Teresa, all roads ultimately lead back to those who control the money printers, those who control the central bankers. They can print whatever they want for any operation they choose to put into process, and thus they control militaries, which means they control countries, those who print the money, ultimately at the top of this pyramid of insanity. On that note, the following question from John. John asks, Bloomberg has reported that the military has spent $35 trillion on secret programs. My guess, John says, is that they have built underground cities and tunnels. Do you have any ideas what the military is spending this $35 trillion on? Yes, look up, and that is certainly a big part of the equation. The engineering of Earth's life support systems over the past 75 plus years at scale is a massive part of the equation, but there are countless layers to this insanity. There are so many various covert programs going on, and the more that they ramp up these programs, the more damage they do, the more consequences that are caused, thus releasing more programs. For example, in the climate, now that methane is entering the atmosphere and covering the planet like a layer of glass, which is causing a massive thermal energy buildup on the planet. Now we have Project Lucy and Project Alamo. Those are acronyms for using radio frequency microwave transmissions to try to nuke the atmosphere with these transmissions in a desperate and unimaginably dangerous attempt to degrade the atmospheric buildup of methane. One layer of insanity on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. This is comparable to the pharmaceutical industrial complex treatment of planet Earth. You take one pharmaceutical to treat a symptom that causes a cascading downstream effect of consequences, then you have to take more pharmaceuticals for those consequences, and the cycle just continues until the organism is no longer living. And that's what's happening with our planet. Again, layer upon layer upon layer of insanity. The military-industrial complex is completely comparable to a cancer whose intent is to proliferate at any cost without consideration of the consequences until the host eventually dies, and that is the track we are on right now. So again, back to those who can print endless amounts of money out of thin air. They are completely out of control, as we would expect. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And for the record, the entire CV-19 scenario is completely interwoven with everything else. Those in power are well aware of the fact that planet's failing life support systems can no longer support the human population. That's a mathematical and statistical fact. Connect the dots on your own as far as what is happening now, how these pieces of the puzzle fit together, from climate engineering to CV-19. All countries around the world, all major powers are colluding and cooperating on all of these scenarios. It cannot be otherwise. Consider the ramifications. Consider where we are today and where we are headed at blinding speed. The insanity must be exposed. Those in power must be exposed for what they are. Our window of time to accomplish this is rapidly running out. We must, all of us, make every day count in this battle. Next question. Christina would like to know, the entire country is under a regional transformation. Her question is, are the weather movers utilizing aerosol injection to create drought in the West so wildfires will relocate rural citizens into, quote, regions? I know that narrative is out there, and there may be agendas to some degree to confirm that, but the actual equation is much, much larger, Christina. In regard to the drought in the U.S. West and other regions that have been droughted out and incinerated, like Australia, like Spain, like Portugal, is that a direct result of climate engineering operations? The short answer is yes. Does that mean global warming is not occurring? No. The planet is not just warming, it's in a state of total meltdown. And the only thing masking that fact from a percentage of the population is when these sensationalized engineered winter weather events are created, and that creates the confusion and division in the population as to the true state of planetary meltdown. And every one of these engineered winter events is further fueling the overall warming of the planet. In regard to the droughting out of certain regions, like California, which then sets the stage for the epic and unprecedented incinerations, the overall agenda is much, much larger than any objective to move people out of rural areas. Understand that on the current course, no one gets out alive. The planet ceases to support life. Again, that is the trajectory we are on. We are in completely uncharted territory, and there are far too many people trying to tell themselves that this is some sort of natural process, or that somehow the planet will right itself and humans can keep doing what they are doing. And that is simply delusion at this point. All forms of human activity that interfere with the planet's energy balance and life support systems are a form of climate engineering. And the decimation that's been done has accelerated the planet into a rate of change that has never been seen in the planet's history. The changes that are occurring, the mass extinction that we are free falling into, is happening at hundreds of times the pace of any previous mass extinction. It's imperative to understand and remember that. So back to the wildfire scenario. This is a form of artificial volcano at this point that the climate engineers are using to further load the atmosphere with sun-blocking particulates which circulate toward the polar regions, which provide temporary cooling for the poles. This is due to the Coriolis effect, the spin of the planet. It spins these particulates toward the polar regions, providing several months perhaps of temporary cooling, again at the cost of eliminating Earth's life support systems. And the source of ignition, I want to state this, on these wildfires is a secondary topic. Once you set the stage for the forests to burn with such ferocity, anything can spark that change. So it is the climate engineering issue that is setting the stage. The planet should be producing more overall rain on a warming planet. The laws of physics make this clear. 7% more moisture is held in the atmosphere for every degree C of warming. The core causal factor that is interfering with an overall increase in planetary precipitation is climate engineering. Please search the engineering drought section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Search the engineering wildfire section to understand more about what is happening and why, and the geoengineering agenda behind what is occurring. And again, this is not to deny all other forms of human damage to the planet. We have been horrific stewards of planet Earth. But the bottom line is there can be no legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering issue. And we have massive denial on every side of this equation, from those that deny there's even anything wrong with the planet, which is completely irrational at this point. Those that are claiming it's some sort of natural cycle, I still hear about this from certain people. And again, the argument I've made is that's like finding a body in the street that's been run over, beaten, stabbed, blown up, shot, and then claiming that person died of natural causes. That's a completely irrational argument. And from the other side of the fence, those that refuse in the environmental communities, those that refuse to acknowledge the climate engineering factor because their organizers, their heads of their organizations like Bill McKibben, who receives money from the Rockefeller Foundation, or Amy Goodman from Democracy Now!, who receives money from the Ford Foundation. These people are bought, sold, and paid for. I'm sorry if that is difficult to digest or to accept, but that is the fact of the matter. Those on every side of this equation are in one way or another controlled, again, by those who print the money. They control the narrative, and we must break that cycle. But about the wildfires, again, search this for one of our most important reports. Wildfires serve geoengineering agenda. You might have to search quite hard on Google, since Google is trying so hard to censor the information from geoengineeringwatch.org. Wildfires serve geoengineering agenda. Watch that 22-minute report, and you will learn much, much more about the various layers of the climate engineers' efforts to facilitate incredibly intense incinerations of what is left of Earth's remaining forests. Thank you for your question, Christina. Moving on, David asks, how do these people/entities have the right to decimate the atmosphere seemingly at will with a nefarious in-game of eugenics, and who has granted such authority? David, in answer to your question, it is a profoundly important question. And as I've stated on so many broadcasts, those in power could not do what they are doing without the active or passive support of the majority population. And this is profound to watch occurring. How many will line up and do whatever they are told to do with the delusional belief that somehow by doing so, they will put their life back to quote-unquote normal. A normal which was a trajectory of near-term planetary omnicide from the beginning. You can't loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute the entire planet indefinitely without the ultimate consequences coming into play. And we are at that point now. So the bottom line is, unless or until a majority of the population refuses to continue doing the bidding of those in power, we will continue on this trajectory, a trajectory of near-term planetary omnicide. Those in power do what they do because too many in the population and the military are willing to do exactly what they're told without any question as to the morality or total lack of it. Thank you for your question, David. Milt asks, is cloud seeding a weapon of mass destruction, or a measure to reduce global warming, Let me back into this. In regard to reducing global warming, climate engineering is further fueling the overall fire. Climate engineering, through various processes like chemical ice nucleation for other modification, can and is producing highly toxic short-term cooldowns that are highly sensationalized by the power structure-owned press at the cost of a worsened overall warming. So by its very definition, climate engineering, which is not cloud seeding, by the way, I want to stress that, Milt. Cloud seeding is what the public perceives as being the only thing happening in our skies. These small single-engine propeller-driven planes with a few flares strapped to the wings, and they think that's the only form of weather modification occurring, and that's exactly what the power structure wants the public to think. That is not geoengineering. The normal publicized cloud seeding operations are simply a red herring, smoke and mirrors designed to distract the public from the exponentially larger and more destructive climate engineering operations. So by their very definition and the consequences they are causing, all climate engineering operations are a weapon of mass destruction, a weapon that holds indeed life on Earth in the balance. The atmospheric assault, the aerosol spraying assault that includes RF microwave transmissions to manipulate these particulates in the atmosphere. Mathematically and statistically speaking, this is the greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm. Thank you for your question, Milt. Karen asks, I'm very confused at how this comes to pass. Who is in control, and what are the pilots told? What are the planes actually doing in the sky to begin with? Well, Karen, certainly we have commercial aircraft that have been utilized as part of these programs for a very, very long time. That's why the commercial carrier industry is so heavily subsidized in many ways. That's why we have the DoD, Department of Defense, leasing 800 to 1,000 commercial carriers right now. Their aircraft being utilized in these programs. It's a form of plausible denial when these commercial aircraft marked planes can be used as an example of commercial aircraft leaving these massive dispersions. Thus, it must be just, quote, condensation when it is anything but. It is not just condensation. It is not condensation at all, in fact. That narrative is a blatant, glaring lie. I encourage people to search at geoengineeringwatch.org, high bypass turbofan engine, a jet-powered fan. That's all commercial carriers, all military tankers. Bottom line is that engine by design, because 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. That engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail. And we have up-close photos of the nozzles retrofit mounted on the pylons aimed into the exhaust jet stream to make this look like, quote, condensation. So back to the who is in control part. Again, we answered that earlier in this broadcast. Those who print the money, or those who control those who print the money. That's the ultimate core to this equation. As far as what the pilots are being told, they're being told they're doing something benevolent, something for the greater good. Just like the pilots in Vietnam who were spraying their comrades on the ground and countless civilians with Agent Orange. We're being told they're doing something for the greater good. That's the big lie that's perpetrated on industrialized, militarized societies, that serving the empire is somehow patriotic or somehow for the greater good, and preserving freedom and democracy could not be further from the truth. When will Americans wake up from that delusion? They are fighting to empower the empire, and that's it. That's the bottom line. Let me shatter another delusion while I'm at it, because Americans are led to believe that we give so much relief and resources and money to impoverished nations around the globe that couldn't be further from the truth. Here's how it works. That the U.S. government or the IMF grants a loan to a dictator of some country with resources. The dictator does whatever he wants with that resource, generally lock down his own populations, and then in exchange for that gift to a dictator, the empire moves in and begins to remove the resources from this country. That's how it works. The public, the populations of these impoverished nations never see a penny of that relief. But the U.S. populations are programmed into believing that the U.S. military is some massive force for good around the world. It is simply a mercenary force at this point that is being used for the empire to obtain the resources it needs. Look at the, quote, relief we gave to Iraq. We decimated their country under completely false pretenses, and that is just one example of countless examples. I could go on for hours about those examples, but it's time for all of us to shatter the delusion, to clear the lens through which we see the world, that we might clearly view the horizon and understand where we are heading at blinding speed. The horizon is not dim, it's black. Short of a complete course correction, we are done. Next question from Angela. My husband and I have been listening to your broadcast and researching your website materials since 2014. We appreciate your focus on facts and science. She continues, we grew up in the 70s and early 80s when the American people were blamed in the media for damaging the ozone with aerosols such as spray deodorant and hairspray. Now the media seems to have abandoned this narrative in favor of global warming. Angela continues with this. No question on our part that burning of hydrocarbon fuels over time plays a role. However, it seems geoengineering that has been ramping up for more than 60 years, has been the more significant factor in ozone loss. That is exactly true, Angela. She continues, how much of this severe decline in our ecosystem is due to the loss of ozone? Question mark. Final statement, the ozone seems critical and its loss a major factor in heating up of the earth. Are the geoengineers trying to falsely recreate the ozone layer? Is there a scientific possibility of restoring it naturally? Yes, you are exactly on track. Biggest factor in ozone layer destruction is climate engineering. I encourage people to search geoengineeringwatch.org. Geoengineering is destroying the ozone layer to learn more about that. They are not trying to do anything positive in regard to the destruction of the ozone layer. They're simply trying to mask the effects, and in doing so, by the method they are doing so, they are further worsening the ozone layer loss. Think about the insanity of that. Further ramping up the climate engineering operations to try to mask the effects of ozone layer collapse when it is the climate engineering operations themselves that are the core causal factor for that collapse in the first place. And I'm not ignoring, again, all other forms of human activity that have contributed to that collapse, but I'm saying the single largest factor in the equation is climate engineering. Can the ozone layer restore itself if the planet's life support systems are not completely decimated, and if climate engineering can be completely halted along with every other form of destructive human activity? And that list is long indeed. We don't know. Possibly the planet may be able to restore some of its life support systems, but only if we leave it alone. The planet cannot continue to sustain any life if we continue to saddle it with human activity, human insanity that is destroying every miraculous aspect of the planet's life support system. Thank you for your question, Angela. Daniel asks, upon forcing the power structure to cease geoengineering operations, have you considered that we may experience a termination shock that would be worse than allowing operations to continue? Daniel then asks, what projections do you have on the climate during this shock, suddenly stopping the spraying? I thoroughly respect your work and efforts, but find it hard to escape the depressing reality that we are through the guardrail. Daniel finishes with this: what if continuing dispersions is unfortunately what is salvaging what remains of Earth's life support systems? What if that's what it actually looks like? Sorry to be a downer, I just think that the whiplash effect may be completely devastating. Very important question, Daniel. Thank you for submitting this. What you're referring to is what is scientifically termed double catastrophe scenario. To learn more about this, search geoengineeringwatch.org double catastrophe scenario. What happens when the climate engineering operations are completely brought to a halt? And that will happen. There's no question. It's a matter of time. One way or the other, they will stop. If such a cessation does not occur until the planet's life support systems completely fail, then that's where the story ends. Game over. But if we are able to expose and halt these operations before the planet's life support systems are completely decimated, we do have a chance. And the official narrative from the so-called climate science community that once you start climate engineering, you can never, ever stop. Think of the insanity of that narrative. That's like telling a heroin addict the withdrawals are too difficult. You must keep upping your dose until you're dead. And that's basically what they're telling us. Is Daniel correct that there will be unimaginable blowback once the energy that's being built up in the planet is allowed to release? He is completely correct. And this blowback will be beyond horrific. No one knows, none of us know how brutal this blowback will be if the hydrological cycle is allowed to completely resume. Coastal everything is done. That's a given. Done. It's a matter of time and not much time. The polar meltdowns will continue. You could shut every single form of human activity off right now. And as Daniel correctly stated, yes, we are through the guardrail and we are going to the bottom of the canyon. And now the only question is, will anyone survive the ride? We can't know, but we can know this. If we continue on the current course, no one will make that trip alive. No one gets out alive if we remain in the current course. If human activity and the current construct of human civilization is allowed to continue any longer, it will be game over. Again, profoundly important question, Daniel. Thank you for asking it. I'm almost out of time for this particular session of Climate Engineering Q&A. I want to get to a couple more related questions before I run out of time. Let's consider this question from Wendell, who states, it's a question and a statement. He states, mankind is well into the sixth extinction event, and due to mankind's stupidity, we are all doomed to die horrific deaths. He continues, with the hydrological cycle and the ozone layer just about obliterated, in conjunction with the heavily toxic soils from geoengineering fallout, it appears that any attempt of being, quote, a survivalist or a, quote, prepper is at best one's attempt to postpone the inevitable, which is death. He continues, will people have to resort to the lowest form of existence, which is cannibalism, in order to have a chance to survive this extinction event we are in right now? ? Finishes with this. In the final analysis of planet Earth, the planet will survive this sixth extinction event, but mankind is finished. There is just way too many, quote, stupid people in positions of influence and power running or controlling things on this planet. Heaven help us all, Wendell. Well, you are truly on track, Wendell, with everything you stated. Can that equation be altered? There's only one way to find out, and that way will take all of us, absolutely all of us, prioritizing the attempt to first expose the climate engineering insanity and then bringing everything else to the surface with it. Again, if you're on a boat and that boat is sinking rapidly, I'm not stating climate engineering is the only threat we face, not at all. The list is so long it would take hours or days to cover it all. All the things that must be done differently if the human race is to have any any possible chance of surviving even the near-term horizon. But if you're in a boat and that boat has many holes in the bottom, and that is the story of the human race, your top priority must be to plug the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first. We must think logically, rationally. We are playing chess. We must learn how to play chess well if we're to have any chance of prevailing. If we can expose what's happening in our skies, which is much, much more than just, quote, climate engineering. It is weather warfare. It is over-the-horizon communications. It is EMP offense and defense. But bottom line is it is a death sentence to the planet, period. If we can expose and halt that, we can move on to other factors that we must deal with. And one more point on the aerosol dispersions. We know with certainty and have proven that with our documentary, The Dimming, available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for free, that these dispersants are highly toxic elements, climate engineering elements. But what else is being dispersed? What biologicals may be a part of this mix? And consider that with these spraying operations already in place, this is a rational conclusion that must not be ignored, that at any point in time of the power structure's choosing, if they disperse something much more lethal, game over for all of us immediately. And they absolutely have that capability, and any notion that they would not do this is a very, very naive notion. Every breath we take is currently tainted with highly toxic elements. That's a given. A lab test proven given. Atmospheric testing also proving this. But again, at any point in time, they can alter that mix to something much, much more lethal. Never forget that. Final question, Heather asks, what do you think we could have done differently? ? She asked, what other options did the controllers really have other than to secretly thin the herd? ? Heather finally states this, I can't come up with a scenario that doesn't end in our destruction and most of the living things on the planet along with us, unfortunately. That's a profoundly important question as well, Heather. As far as what the controllers could have done differently, they could have incorporated and practiced and taught some form of morality, some form of virtue, some form of honor. They could have told the truth from the beginning, that we would have not continued down this path of certain near-term planetary omnicide. But those in power, those who print the money, and those who serve those who print the money did not do that. Their unbridled greed, their lust for power was simply too addicting, and they plowed forward on this path of, again, certain near-term planetary omnicide, and far too many of the population was all too willing to go along with this, to keep their personal paradigm going, to keep their paychecks and pensions going. That is why we're in this place. It is not just those in power. It is a population that has been all too willing to go along, all too willing to serve the dictates of those in power in order to keep their personal paradigm going. Again, I stress, those in power could not do what they do without the active or passive support of the population. That must change. And if we can change it, if we can change course, who knows what may yet be possible? And the only way to find out is to join this epic battle for salvaging what yet remains of our planet's life support systems. No matter how dark the horizon, we, each of us, all of us, can decide to refuse to go silently into the night. We can set about effectively and efficiently waking those around us. Reaching a critical mass of awakening is the first and most important leap forward in this battle. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn more about how you can help. Share credible data from a credible source. Make your voice heard. Make every day count. I'm out of time for this week's session of Climate Engineering Q&A. My deepest thanks to all that have submitted questions. To those that have submitted questions that I was not able to get to yet, again, I'll do my best to answer as many as possible in the next installment of Climate Engineering Q&A. If you wish to submit a question, please do so at questions@geoengineeringwatch.org. Until next week, stay safe, stay strong. This is Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch.